I'm a storyteller who works in Octo in the office of the CTO. I work alongside a lot of scientists. There's about 100 of them and one of me. It's my job to kind of apply my storytelling techniques to their work. But what I'm going to try today is to flip that and apply their scientific techniques to my storytelling methodologies. We're going to do this through the vehicle called the science of fiction. Just don't expect my science to hold up to their standards. But we are going to start with the story of a real scientist. Does anybody know who this person is? The clue is he's a scientist. Tom? No? This is Howard Moskowitz. He's actually a psychophysicist. And as far as I can tell at least, psychophysics is about measuring things. And it was Howard's obsession with measuring things that led him to discover what's known as the bliss point. And this phrase was born around 30 years ago when Howard did something that seemed unremarkable. He changed the recipe of Prego, right? But he changed it in a way that was truly remarkable. He engineered the recipe around the three tastes that we've evolved to favor: salt, sugar, and fat. And you see, combinations of salt, sugar, and fat are much more rewarding than any one of them alone. It's why the sugary ketchup and the salty pickle in that burger taste so great alongside the fatty patty. But if this is making you hungry, did anybody miss lunch? If it is, somebody at the back, thank you. AV crew, they always miss lunch, sorry. If it is making you hungry, that's because the mechanics of the bliss point are at work on your brain right now. When you last ate that burger, your brain responded with a reward in the form of a jolt of endorphins. It remembered what you did to get that reward, and then, or now, if you're hungry, the neurotransmitter dopamine is compelling you to do it again, to take another bite. What Howard discovered was how to engineer addiction into food. And what I think we can do is take Howard's science of addiction and apply it elsewhere, to the science of fiction. And that's what I'm going to do for the next 10 minutes. Like I said, just don't expect the science to hold up. Along the way, I'm going to take Howard's science and apply it to fiction, identifying the three key storytelling ingredients that I think were evolved to favor, the ones that keep us coming back for more. Along the way, I'm going to touch on 9 mantras that hopefully will help you tell better stories. Mantras that come from my day job as a storyteller at Autodesk. Mantras that will give you some insights into my methodology that you can hopefully take and apply elsewhere. So, mantra number 1, salt, sugar, fat. Howard Moskowitz discovered the magic of 3 ingredients. And equally, 3 ingredients works for the stories that I write very, very often, I'm sure you'll see. Like the story I wrote with Andrew this week. You know, if Andrew provided 2 examples here, you'd think that he was too lazy. Provide 4, you'd think that he wasn't rigorous enough to cut it down for 3. Right? 3 is the magic number. Take Tom, Bill, and myself, right? 3 is a pretty special thing. The 3 Stooges. Which brings us to the 3 acts of storytelling: beginning, middle, and end. Now, dividing your story into 3 acts like this, it's also a good mantra, but everybody knows this one. This one comes for free. This isn't one of the 9. But the second mantra picks up with Act 1, the first act of your story, the very beginning. Now, in cinema, this is known as the inciting incident. This is where you hook or possibly lose your audience. Hopefully you're all still with me, right? Because you know, you were intrigued to find out what Howard Moskowitz and Prego have got to do with storytelling. But you know, imagine instead I stood up here and I said to you today, you know, today I'm going to talk to you about storytelling. Or worse, I started my talk saying, you know, today I'm going to talk to you about storytelling, but first I have to talk to you about pasta sauce. What I'd be doing then, I'd be reading the recipe for my story rather than just telling you the story. So, mantra number 2, don't share the recipe, just tell the story, and do it from an interesting and provocative angle, and do it convincingly and quickly. Why? To Tom's point, nobody reads books anymore. Does anybody know how many seconds you have to secure somebody's attention? Anyone care to guess? Louder? Tom, I should never have come to you. 20 is the answer. Thank you for the guess. I can't hear them from up here. 20. Well, our social media team tell me it's actually 12, but they've got no attention span. I don't believe them for a second. Spend all their time on Facebook. Seriously, though, or perhaps not so seriously, why do you think we see such cheap sensationalist tricks like this? You know, or this, or this. It's to get our attention, of course. And by the way, there's that magic number 3 again. But journalism, quality journalism at least, not the stuff you find in the UK tabloids, is a really good parallel. Journalists start their stories with the most important information. They embody the story in a provocative headline, and after this, they write what's called the lead. A good lead can convey an awful lot in a few dozen words. In this case, just 45 powerful, punchy, and provocative words. And so what comes after the lead? Oh, right, nothing, right? If your lead isn't good enough, people aren't paying attention. They're thinking about something else already. And remember I said you had 20 seconds to secure an audience's attention? Read aloud, that's actually more or less exactly 45 words. And that's why journalists spend about 3/4 of their writing time getting that lead just right. They know that if they get it right, everything else from there will just flow. And journalists call this the inverted pyramid structure. I call it the Dirty Martini for 3 reasons. Not 2, not 4, 3. Right, 1, it's really hard to find a photo of an inverted pyramid. 2, we're in Vegas, and 3, it fits my narrative theme better. So in the Martini hierarchy, your headline sits right at the top between the rim of the glass and the surface of the liquid of the Martini. Your lead comes down from the vodka or gin, depending on your preference, down to the olive. And then, from there, the further down you go in the story, the further down into the depths of the Martini you go. And that's mantra number 3, the Dirty Martini. You should approach your stories like you approach your martinis from the top down. And that's what mantra number 4 is all about, cake mix. When cake mix first appeared in the 1940s, all anybody needed to add to it was just water. Right? But nobody liked it. Why? It seems there wasn't enough effort involved in making a cake this way. Stirring water into something wasn't enough to make people say, here's a cake I made. So what did the manufacturers do? They took the eggs and the milk out of the powder. Suddenly, with eggs to be broken, milk to be measured, people felt very differently about that cake mix. Why? Well, now it was their cake. They'd done just enough work to feel a sense of ownership for that cake. And it turns out that adding just enough work resulted in just enough reward. And to build reward into storytelling, you need to make people work. The key mechanism here is hunger. And this is what mantra number 5 is all about, how we feed that hunger. And to see how this mechanism works, we're going to step from the world of food to the world of art for just one brief moment, and to this painting. Now, you're going to have to shout out when I ask you this question, but would anybody care to suggest why this painting works? What device Michelangelo used to create such tension in this painting?
Separation. Not actually touching.
Bingo. That awkward, the gap. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thank you, Bill. I didn't prime you, right? No. Mentally, we have a hunger to close that gap. We're trying to resolve it visually. And this hunger is our curiosity at play. Curiosity is the intellectual desire to answer questions and to close open gaps. And story actually kind of feeds this by playing the opposite way, posing questions and opening gaps. And so by engineering a gap, a conflict, like Tom said, some trouble and an imbalance into your story, you feed your audience's desire. You make them hungry to do what their curiosity demands them to do and close that gap. Do this and your audience gets that same reward, that jolt of endorphins that compels them to do it again. And so, you feed them to do it repeatedly, making your audience work, resolving this imbalance. And it's this work that makes your audience feel a sense of ownership. Your story becomes their story, like the cake made from the cake mix. And when it comes to stories, don't we love frosting and sprinkles? We know we shouldn't, but we take a story and we add this, nice, sugary, colorful layer to it, and then we add another, and maybe one more. But stories, I feel, are like donuts. Too much frosting and too many sprinkles, and we lose sight of that all-important gap. So mantra number 6, avoid the empty calories of unnecessary colorful layers. You should find that gap between the, oh-so-ordinary world, the world without your big idea, and the ideal world, the one with your idea. And you sculpt away until you make that gap as visible as possible. And then it's easy to make your audience work by stepping them forwards and backwards across this gap, kind of using their resistance like you're tacking in sailing, harnessing that resistance to your advantage. And you do that by juxtaposing what is versus what could be. Today's ordinary world versus tomorrow's ideal world. The status quo versus the promise of a happy ending. And all good fiction deals with some conflict, some trouble, some imbalance. It's what keeps us reading. And the gap you engineer into your story uses this same mechanism to keep people listening. And while they're listening, they're working. And while they're working, they're taking ownership of your story, your idea. So, you've helped your audience make the cake. You've resisted the temptation to add too much frosting and sprinkles, so the core flavor of your ideas comes through as cleanly as possible. You began with a punchy, provocative angle on your idea, and then you took the energy of that punch and you transferred it into putting your audience to work, resolving for themselves your story, your idea. So now they feel that it's their cake, their story. So what now? Well, they're bought in. If you worked in sales at this point, you close the deal. And you are selling something. You're selling your idea. So think like a salesman and always be closing. You might want to secure you might not want to secure a purchase order, but you will want to secure something. Perhaps you want to secure support or funding, or maybe you just need to capture mind share. Maybe you want mind share support and funding. And that's mantra number 7. Ask yourself where the sweet spot is for what you want to ask of your audience. Figure that out, and you've figured out the sweet spot for your ending. And so, we get close to my ending. There's just one more mantra to go before we get to that. And mantra number 8 is Starbucks. This relates back to Howard and his work with coffees at, can anybody guess where? Starbucks, of course. If I asked you all what type of coffee you like, the majority of you would answer that you like a rich, dark roast, or some equivalent of that phrase. But it turns out most of you don't. I know because Howard Moskowitz measured it, this exact thing for Starbucks. 3/4 of you actually prefer milky, weak coffee. Starbucks, right? So the lesson here is to make sure your story is not too rich and dark, not too milky and weak. You need to adjust your product to find that sweet spot in the middle, a sweet spot between what your audience wants to hear and what you want them to hear, or what you need them to hear, rather. And so, the final mantra, the secret sauce. I've called this because, firstly, it relates back to the whole story about Howard and Prego. And that's another free mantra, relating the end of your story back to the start. It's always a good idea. But the second reason why the final mantra is called secret sauce is this is where I reveal my secret recipe for storytelling. The 3 key storytelling ingredients that together are more rewarding than any one alone, the ones that keep us coming back for more. Thinking about this across the 3 parts of any story, the first ingredient is provocation. If your opening doesn't provoke, it won't matter because nobody will be listening. An opening that provokes not only secures people's attention, it captures their imagination and sparks their curiosity. Curiosity is the desire to close open gaps. So make your audience curious and use story to feed this desire by opening those gaps. By stepping your audience back and forth across that gap you've engineered into your story, you build the second key ingredient of storytelling: influence. You're influencing your audience to do what their curiosity demands them. Take them round this loop often enough, and your audience gets that same reward, that jolt of endorphins that compels them to do it again. You've made them work just enough, and your story becomes their story. Your idea becomes their idea. You've influenced a sense of ownership. From here, the key ingredient is yours to own. It's whatever you choose to compel your audience to do. And so, this is the Holy Trinity, the bliss point for story, the science of fiction. Thank you.